Today on Shift Happens, I'm joined by Bizzie Gold, entrepreneur, thought leader, and founder of Break Method. After years of working with high-performing clients and noticing patterns in human behavior, Bizzie set out on a mission to investigate why people stay stuck in destructive cycles, even when they desperately want to change. This search led her deep into the world of brain mapping and emotional rewiring, tools she now uses to help people break free from subconscious programming that's been ruining and running their lives. In today's conversation, Bizzie breaks down what emotional rewiring actually is, how our brains are often liars feeding us distorted narratives, and why true transformation starts by understanding the subconscious stories we believe. If you have ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but still hitting the same walls, this episode will challenge the way you see yourself, your mind, and your potential. Bizzie Gold, welcome to Shift Happens. I'm so happy you're here.
Me too. I've followed your show since you started it, and I'm very excited to be here.
Yay. I loved getting to really snoop your whole Instagram, your whole website, learning so much about emotional rewiring and brain mapping, which I'm not really that familiar with until I really honestly took a deep dive into your work. And then it got me thinking as I was preparing for the questions, why and how you got into this field. And I was like, she does so much work talking about other people and their patterns. I want to know more about you first, and then we will get into all of the, brain mapping and all that stuff. So at first I want to ask, can you describe how your home life was for you growing up? Was it a calm one? Was it an in tune one? Was it chaotic? Bring us into that.
I love that you're starting with that question because that sets the stage for all of the rest, including the whole of my work. I grew up in a very chaotic household, very wealthy and a lot of access to things, but ultimately behind closed doors, chaotic, very unstable mother with borderline personality disorder. I think my dad probably classically fits the narcissistic bill. However, as he's aged and as I've grown to know his personality outside of being just my father, I've come to see him very differently. And I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to brain pattern mapping. I spent a lot of time with a nanny, parents extremely busy, although my dad did take me to school every single morning. And that's something that kind of sticks out in my mind is amongst so much busyness and always being with different care providers that weren't really my parents, I did have certain consistent habits with my dad. So I was definitely a daddy's girl. And I think that did impact me to some large extent. In a lot of my work, I talk about how it is that siblings, for example, could be raised in the same exact house and then come out with two totally different brain pattern types. And this is certainly true for my sister and I. I had a younger sister who was about 3.5 years younger than me. And she really gravitated toward my mom. She was mommy's girl and I was daddy's girl. And that was just enough of a change in the inputs and our repetition that really made us fork in wildly different directions. Like we couldn't be more different in how we see the world and how we choose to respond to what we're seeing and so on. So I do think that chaotic environment where I naturally had to try to problem solve and figure things out for myself because people weren't spoon feeding me information. I didn't know who was going to be taking me to and from which activity. My parents were at random traveling. One of my earliest core memories was getting taken to Chuck E. Cheese. I don't know if you know what Chuck E. Cheese is.
Of course I do, girl.
Okay. I think we're relatively the same age. So taking me to Chuck E. Cheese. So I'm all excited because this is something that's way outside of the scope of what my parents would typically let me do. And I remember playing with something and then turning around and then seeing my grandma and I was like, where's mom? And she's like, oh, mom and dad went to Italy. And I'm like, what? They didn't even say goodbye. They just went to Italy for 10 days. And they thought it was a good idea to get me distracted with my grandmother, Shirley, who was like, oh, she's not going to remember anything. Here I am, age 40.
And here we are on the podcast. We're talking about it.
So I think these are some of the things that people discount, especially if you look generationally, which is why I really think my grandmother influenced this one. Because I think in our previous generations, there was this mental toughness that might have led her to believe, oh, she's never going to remember this. Like, just go. Don't be dramatic. Don't say goodbye. She'll get over it. But do we get over these things, or do we potentially compartmentalize, respond, create some sort of rule system or belief system around this input, which certainly my whole childhood is a byproduct of trying to create rules around unstable, chaotic adults, and then trying to anticipate their next move or read their facial expressions so that I can try to keep people happy or keep them placated, right? Part of my mom's big issue was that she was really emotionally unstable and couldn't regulate her mood. So I had to try to read her to try to figure out how I could avoid disaster, doom, or chaos. So absolutely, that set me up for the career that I'm in today, because it made me a problem solver on my own without looking to another adult to solve my problems, because there was no adult around to solve my problems.
So when we talk about your parents and, you know, them going to Italy, or, you know, a little bit of that chaos, let's talk about if you did have a problem or an issue or something that maybe you wanted to go and express to your parents. Did you feel safe enough to express your emotions to them?
No. I think big picture, there's selective things that I could go to my parents about, but it wasn't an environment where it was safe to just express anything that you were going through. There was much more an expectation of me as the older sister to compartmentalize, to pull it together, to be tough, which it has its positives and negatives. I'm actually really grateful that I did have that experience, especially now that I'm 11 years down the road with brain pattern mapping, looking at the data. There are significantly better outcomes when you have to experience a certain level of chaos and emotional instability, because you do fortify yourself, you become emotionally resilient, and you do become tough. That sustains you in your adult life. So I don't have any regrets about that, for sure. Although absolutely it was not possible for me to just go with any feeling that I was having. I had to learn how to deal with it myself.
How did your parents' relationship and marriage, and even just your inability to feel safe expressing your feelings and emotions, how did that affect your future relationships, even if it's friendships or romantic?
Well, I think it naturally makes me more independent, because I do naturally compartmentalize, process things by myself. I am good at putting on a facade and showing some toughness. So I'm sure you can relate to this. There's pros and cons to that in dating. It's made me a very appealing girl to date, because I'm not needy. I'm not clingy, right? You know,
I do.
Same. But at the same time, that starts to present like a more masculine dominant role in the relationship real quick.
All of a sudden we were leading.
Like, oops. So everything has a flip side to it. And while that's made me an appealing dating target throughout my years, because I'm not those things that we just described, I have had to work really hard on learning how to actually soften into my feminine and be led by somebody else, and actually go to my husband and share my feelings even when I really don't want to. So I've had to oppose all of those patterns in my marriage so that I can be a woman instead of what some of my clients call a hot dude. You're like a hot dude.
Seriously,
like,
so
great.
funny and so on point. I'm gonna use that, hot dude.
Hot dude.
That is how I feel.
I know, same. But I've had to try to really step into my feminine. But
it's oh my gosh,
hard.
it's so hard, especially like you're talking about, right? You go through that chaos, you go through struggles, and we all do, but all of us to a different degree. And so I, you know, with my background and going through so much trauma, you do learn to cope in certain ways. And like you were mentioning, compartmentalization is so big for me. I can literally, you would never know if yesterday at Stagecoach when I went, if I had a crazy day. I didn't, but let's just say I had, like, it was so bad, and I, you know, no, I can sit here and I'm just here and I'm talking. Or if, let's just say I was in a relationship and it was going bad, but my friend wanted to go to lunch, or I can flip it so well. But then it's harder to get to into me. It's like I can build up a fortress in a way. And so I have to learn how to consistently take down the bricks take down the wall and ask for that help or be vulnerable or let people lead or let any romantic relationship lead me, because I start to believe no one will actually really show up for me.
Because the core wound is the abandonment wound. So in brain pattern mapping, there's a split in brain pattern types. So there's 5 total out of 8 billion people. So essentially you take 8 billion people, there's really only 5 different versions of a brain pattern. And there's 9 markers within those 5 brain pattern types. You likely have one that's almost exactly like mine or very slightly to the left of mine. Ultimately, there's some other things that are going to come in tandem with this. So tell me if this is also true for you.
Okay.
Because you're so good at compartmentalizing, at a certain point, you may not even address things personally. Like if somebody hurts you or harms you, you're not necessarily going to go up to their face and go deal with it. Your brain is going to just be like, I'll figure it out later. Just deprioritize, focus on the present moment. So much so that you may never actually fully confront certain things. You just get over them before you've even confronted them.
I think it depends on the issue, but
certain issues. But in general, this is one of the things that goes in tandem with that is, I've had a lot of people, in particular women in my life, that fit more of the covert narcissist sort of bill come into my world because they're attracted to the experience of power. So a woman that is a little bit more clingy, needy, anxious attachment style, wanting to have power, they're naturally attracted to the power that you or I would actually demonstrate, because they're identifying power when they're really just seeing independence, self-trust, right? The ability to self-regulate. So they're seeing that and they don't know how to necessarily define it, but they just feel the power and they're like, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
Now, those are also the people that will little by little start to turn people against you in your organization, because really more than they actually want to be your friend, they want to beat you.
I've totally experienced that.
It's pretty common when you are the brain pattern type that we are. We attract them like moths to a flame.
But I feel like I attract that with men too.
You do. So like brain pattern type wise, what we're talking, the covert narcissist and the borderline are right next to each other on the brain pattern spectrum. And pretty much guaranteed you are attracting rejection-oriented men.
What does that mean?
The brain pattern spectrum splits into 2 sides. There's an abandonment side to the left and a rejection side to the right. Every step you move from the center out to the left, self-trust is going to increase, independence is going to increase. Typically, there's more of a drive toward purpose and career, even workaholism, right? If you get all the way out to that left-hand side, right? Because work is easier than relationships. Relationships tend to be a sticking point. There's more drama, there's more conflict, and it's like, ugh, I want that, but that's just too much drama, because you end up moving to the left, not wanting a lot of drama, and not necessarily becoming completely conflict avoidant, but desiring for things to be relatively stable.
I do have a deep desire for stability, for sure.
But you attract chaotic people, though.
I do.
Yes. So this is kind of the key. So as you move to the left, you are the stability, but you attract all the chaotic people, right? You're understanding the moths to the flame thing. So you want stability, but at the same time, in general, we want stability because we didn't have that as children.
Exactly.
So we're also like setting off this beacon light to everyone who's super mood dysregulated and dramatic, because they want the stability that we exude. But when they come into our lives, we have to work extra hard to stabilize, because they are not stable.
Not stable.
Yes. So this creates something that in my work we call symbiotic dysfunction. For your brain pattern to be activated as it was in childhood, you need certain characters to come into your orbit. And those characters coming into your orbit essentially need to be more chaotic, because you on your own are not chaotic. So for your brain to kind of run its safety loop, where safety just means known cause and effect, it has to bring these characters in to activate you so that you have something to stabilize.
So let's talk about if I'm in a romantic relationship and I'm thinking, okay, so this man's chaos. I feel like it can kind of be quote unquote toxic. And we throw that word around a lot, but maybe it's toxic. Then how would I know? Well, so bring me into what you are saying. Like, do I need this? Is this what I like actually want, this type of relationship? Or am I
I
like,
once wrote an article called Toxic Relationships with Hypoallergenic People to really
okay,
put this into front center display.
yeah.
So a person on their own is not necessarily toxic. It's
Okay.
how people pair together and how their brain pattern types engage with each other that creates toxicity.
Okay.
Because you can have one person who in one relationship is kind of boring and vanilla, and then
Yeah.
another relationship, suddenly they're the most dramatic, chaotic person
Yeah,
ever.
no, that totally makes sense.
So I'll describe the right side, the 9 markers,
Uh-huh.
and then I think we'll have more context for how we're bringing some of these people together.
Okay,
You good
yeah.
with that?
Yeah, let's do that.
So on that left-hand side, as you move to that left-hand side, again, very independent, very centered around work. That doesn't mean that they don't have long-term relationships, because they typically are more serial monogamous, where they're not necessarily dating lots of, they're not hookup culture people.
I'm not hookup culture.
Yeah, so typically left-hand side, not hookup culture people. But that doesn't mean that they're enjoying the relationship. A lot of times the relationship is the source of struggle, and then work is the place of solace. If we go to that right-hand side, starting at the center and walking our way out to the right, self-trust goes down. So basically everything that went up to the left, everything's going down now. So every time I go to the right, self-trust is continuing to go down. But also, instead of being independent, I'm becoming more codependent, all the way to the far right side of the spectrum, dependent. So if you think about an example of a dependent person, this might be somebody who still lives at their parents' house, expects their parents to pay all the bills, just presents as lazy and withdrawn, and cannot generate momentum to actually have any sort of self-preservation. The interesting thing to contrast that, if you go out to the far left-hand side, there's this interesting spot in the middle left where I think you or I would be. We don't have self-preservation when it comes to relationships. We tend to overgive and say yes to things without thinking about it at all, very reflexively, which can absolutely lead to burnout over time. But we have a strong sense of preservation of others. So we're very aware of how to caretake other people.
1000%, yeah.
Right? So like almost extreme empathy. You can empathize with everybody, even the person that just completely screwed you over. You're like, well...
Yeah.
Right, you're actually trying to talk
I'm
yourself
like, well,
out of, well, they had so much trauma.
His childhood wasn't great, and like he didn't have a dad that really like showed him what a man was supposed to be like. I can make all the
same
comparisons, yeah.
So that empathy obviously can be a trap for you, and I'm not saying obviously don't be empathetic, but everything has that double-sided coin, and that is certainly one of them. Now, if you take that and you reverse it the other way, the people that are going to match where we are on the other side, they're actually the ones that are truly lacking empathy. They're the ones that will covet what somebody else has, but truly can't. They have no desire to actually go through the pain. They didn't have childhoods that put them through any sort of pain. And as you move to the right, they become fixated on relational interaction. And I did forget to mention this. One of the other parts of the left-hand side that defines it is that there's an extreme level of situational awareness. So as you move to the left, situational awareness goes up. As you move to the right, situational awareness goes down, and what replaces it is a fixation on what others are thinking about you. So on the left-hand side, somebody like you or I will care if it technically has to do with our reputation, or maybe it impacts like our money or something. But big picture, if somebody doesn't like me, I'm not going to sit there and stress out about it and be like, well, everyone's got their reasons. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm not going to think about it after that moment. I'm just going to move on with my life. On the right-hand side, this is not the case. Every single interaction, imagine the external environment, the volume gets tuned down and people get really laser focused on an eyebrow, a voice intonation. Well, what did she really mean? I don't think she liked me, right? Making up all these false narratives in their head. So that's more likely to happen on that right-hand side in conjunction with either the codependence or the dependence. And typically career and purpose become an increasing struggle, because everything is FOMO, grass is greener. It's always what they don't have instead of what they do have.
Okay,
now,
that makes sense.
These are the people that you are likely to date in this right-hand side. Me too, girl. Because we attract each other, so it's not even it's not even really a choice. Of course, like you choose your partner, but like, do you choose your partner? There's something deeper than our conscious choice, which is sad but true. And it's something that, by the way, can be rewired and unlearned to the point of your original question. right? Am I supposed to be with this person? Is that my equal opposite?
Yeah.
People are attracted to each other because of that term symbiotic dysfunction, where let's say you attract, we're just going to call him guy X, that's somewhere on this right side of the spectrum. Most likely a conflict prone type. So on the right hand side, patterns split between people pleasing and conflict prone. You're not going to date a people pleasing one. You'll find them completely boring. You would not be attracted to them no matter how hot they were. The conflict prone type.
I'm like, I need me a bad boy.
Yep.
I always say the reformed bad boy, but I don't find those. No,
yeah, do they? I don't know.
Do they?
Do they exist?
I
think I know I've
know.
had some come through my program because, and it's funny, at the end of Break Method, people are always like, you should do a dating app because
Dude, honestly,
other people need to find other
probably.
people that have actually healed, right? We have an annual event once a year. I'll invite you to be a speaker. Perfect.
There we go.
Hi, I'm looking for a reformed bad boy
Hi,
who's been through Break
I'm
Method.
single. Yeah. No.
So on this right-hand side, your brain type would be looking for that more conflict prone, most likely that is not stage 5 clinger, because you need there you need there to be some sort of like, you need enough of a push pull.
100%. But
So
enough.
this
If it's too much,
yes,
on either direction, I'm out.
well, but what you're describing, like, this is what drives me nuts is that often what people are calling polarity or spark is actually one shade away from toxicity. And it really is just how our brain pattern is projecting how we're seeing reality in that moment.
Okay.
Right? So one person, and I'm sure every girl can think of this before, where you go to a bar and you're with your girlfriends and then two people are like, that guy's so hot. And you're like, what? Repulsed. Like, what? You really think that guy's attractive?
Yeah.
Disgusting. That has to do with how we're perceiving reality. We could line up a bunch of people, everyone would have a different taste, and it's not really just looks based. There's something else to it. And I think, again, it comes back to this sort of how our brain pattern alters the way we perceive reality, which is going to be dependent on what happens to us in our early childhood environment with the repetitions that we experience. So the people that end up on the right side of the brain pattern spectrum, typically stable household, married parents that have been married at least until age 15 is the most common. Next most common marker would be at least until age 12. In Break Method, we actually track 200 historical data points. So there's a variety of different pieces here, but one of them that correlates is definitely the married parents at least past age 12, but more commonly 15. And in general, parents, for whatever reason, obviously the reason is going to be individualized, let their kid kind of run the show. So whether that's through making the child believe that everybody's a winner, therefore celebrating mediocrity so the child doesn't learn how to push themselves, that's one pathway. Another pathway would be not using any sort of discipline. So anytime the child has a tantrum, the parents just placate. Okay, honey, whatever you want. Oh, we don't want you to have a PlayStation tantrum. Okay, fine. I'll go get you a PlayStation right now. Those are all the sort of inputs that eventually put somebody over on this right hand.
On the right hand. Okay.
Right hand side. So this is what I've found to be the most sad and ironic finding of 11 years of my work, is that actually the more stable and chaotic the childhood environment, the better outcome actually in brain pattern type, but also in reported quality of life. So somebody like you or I on this kind of middle left side, we're the most likely to report the highest quality of life. We're the most likely to be in the top 1% income earners. We're the most likely to be entrepreneurs. There's this whole cluster of success that exists right where we are on the left. And ironically, and I've shared this before on some other podcasts, and I don't know what the spiritual beliefs are of the people that follow your show, but I've actually found and lectured on how true biblical child rearing principles intentionally place you exactly where you and I are placed. Do you want me to go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, let's go.
I don't know.
I'm fully Christian, so I would love to. And I talk about, I have so many different guests on the show that have different beliefs, but a lot of them have a Christian foundation. So go ahead. Go for it.
I was raised Jewish, but I found Jesus when I was 19 and have a very strong
19?
Christian foundation. 19.
Me too.
Okay. Amazing.
A lot happened for me in 19.
Same, 19 was my year. And 19 is also my lucky number. Actually, everything in my whole life happens at 19s. I don't know. And I'm not even a numbers person, but 19 is the one number that somehow
it stands out to you.
Stands out. So with Christian biblical parenting,
Mm-hmm.
we all, I think, know the distortion of it. So let's speak to the distortion first, because there are so many people that have religious trauma. And I'm always grateful that I didn't have that experience, because I was raised in this kind of radically progressive, liberal New York City childhood, very Jewish, very secular. So I didn't have any of that experience. In fact, my first year in college, I remember talking to somebody, and I really at that point didn't think that you would get to college and still believe in Jesus, because the way that I had been programmed was that that was on the same level as an adult believing in Santa Claus. So I remember meeting somebody who really believed that, and I was like, wait, what? I literally couldn't wrap my head around it, because I had had no exposure to people that thought that way. So for me to have that radical paradigm shift just a year later was a pretty wild destiny point in and of itself. So when you look at how people misuse the Bible to influence their parenting techniques and discipline, it usually goes to this whole, spare the rod, spoil the child sort of paradigm.
Yeah.
I did a whole teaching on this, and what I found is actually, if you dig into more of the historical context of it, the rod was actually used to fend off wild animals, and it wasn't to beat who you were protecting. It was to beat off anyone that was trying to influence or harm, essentially, who you were protecting. So I think there's a whole inversion and distortion that happens there. And I certainly don't think the Bible was like, beat your kids into oblivion. Of course not.
No.
But I think it's pretty clear in the Bible that you are not to trust everybody. You are only to trust God, right? There's one point of contact, and yes, respect your elders, but also have discernment, practice discernment, test spirits. Anyone could actually be a bad person. And I think even going to like a Romans 12:2 scenario where you're not to be conformed to the pattern of the world.
Yeah.
These things are all what I think should be being taught biblically. But I think, again, we've kind of had this very distorted, I think, hyper abusive version of it. Because if you're taught not to conform to the pattern of the world and to be really a critical thinker and to trust God and know that some people are bad and you shouldn't just immediately give away your authority and agency, what are you going to have? Well, you're going to have parents that actually let you struggle, let you fight your own battles, not lie to you and tell you that you're doing great when you did a crap job. Right. So that will end up pushing people into this kind of beautiful balance where for someone like you or I, we could take control of a situation, but we also know how to step back and let other people do their thing.
Yes.
That is because typically you're one or the other, and there's only one spot on the brain pattern spectrum where you can do that. You know how to have the discernment to pull back and let other people continue to do their thing.
That makes sense.
But at the same time, patterns like you and I also struggle with delegation. So the delegation struggle can be from a totally different area, and it has more to do with efficiency. So I'll give an example. And this is brain pattern types end up giving us the ability to predict virtually any single thing about that person. So once we have someone's brain pattern type, I can accurately predict how someone would behave in any given situation, and not just how they would behave immediately, but how that behavior would change over time to such a scary degree that it freaks people out.
That is so crazy.
So the technology actually has a 98.3% accuracy in predicting this stuff, and it's all using historical data. So the delegation issue stems from, let's say I'm training an assistant. There's certain things, because you've overloaded your plate and you're always saying yes, and you're actually really excited about all the things you're saying yes to, right? So that's one of the keys here, is that some people, they'll say yes, but it's this kind of like begrudging, people-pleasing sense of duty.
Yes.
That's not our problem. Our problem is that we're actually passionately saying yes about all these things. So if then you have to take an extra potentially 20 minutes to train an assistant to do something, you're going to be like, it's fine, I'm going to do it later. I'll do it this one time. But is it really going to be that one time?
I'm not great at like sitting down and taking the time to train people either.
No.
I just kind of, if you don't know how to do it, man, like.
Yeah, if you can't figure it out on your own.
Oh my gosh, I got to do it for you. Yeah.
So this is why brain pattern mapping actually is one of the most crucial hiring tools that anyone can ever use, because what you want actually is a brain pattern type. It's not how somebody presents at an interview or on a resume.
That totally
you
makes
want
sense.
somebody you're going to hand them a problem. You're going to be like,
Can you do this?
I don't want to know about it until it's solved. Bye. I believe in you. Right? Because some people set people up that way. You or I, the brain pattern type that clearly at this point, I think it's pretty obvious we have the same one. It's not a setup. You actually want that person to thrive. You just want them to thrive autonomously.
Yeah, it's like, I don't really want to map this out for you.
Yeah, then I should just do it myself.
If I'm hiring you, know what you're doing. That's like that. Or that's like if, you know, I, for example, hired a photographer and they were like, "Can you help me shoot the camera?" No, I hired you as a photographer. I'm not teaching you how to shoot the camera. Just shoot the, you know, just do it. So, but sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a negative of me. Like I should slow down and take the time to train and to like really be intentional. It just doesn't come as natural.
You just landed on a really important key. So brain pattern spectrum, right? We've got the left and right sides. We map those out. There is something that's worth mentioning called the mirror effect. So if somebody is placed, let's say middle left, the person that's on the middle right in their exact opposite position in life, in terms of observation, may look really similar. But what drives the person's thoughts and decisions and underlying motivations is extremely different.
Yeah.
And this is something that I see missed in mental health and also recovery quite a bit, where they're just saying basically these two people look alike, they act alike, and they're not taking the time to really dissect how they're actually seeing the world in a contrasted way, because you can't help both people with the same intervention. You have to know how they think to properly intervene. I think this is why a lot of recovery efforts or mental health efforts actually fail, because they're basically saying, oh, you guys are all generally bipolar. Well, there's so much variance of bipolar.
So you guys are like more looking at like the motivations
underneath? Yeah, underlying motivations, which is also a slippery slope, because the whole core of my work is built around self-deception, which ultimately means that some people, depending on where you are in the spectrum, you're aware of these underlying motivations. So for you, I would expect that you would be able to accurately say yes to all of them. They might not make you feel great when you say yes, but you're aware.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is that on the right-hand side, this is not the case. This is what causes projection. Those are their underlying motivations, but they don't like that those are their underlying motivations. So they either deny it at such a deep level that they truly believe that they don't have that, but all of the evidence out in the world would speak otherwise.
Yeah.
There's a very specific place on the far right side that I've had plenty of clients. I think it's been unfortunately increasingly more common in this generation for a variety of factors, including changes in parenting style, social media, in general, just being obsessed with how you're being perceived by others. It forces you, unfortunately, into that far right side. And in that far right side, there's a high prevalence of mental instability, emotional dysregulation, suicidality, intrusive thoughts, gender dysphoria, virtually everything you can think of that is a hot topic right now in social media in the mental health space. It all very much clusters on that far right side.
Wow, that is
versus the far left side, farthest left. This is where you have autism, most autism spectrum patterns. There are some schizophrenic types that can be on the far left as well, because you can become so situationally aware and you're so aware of everything that then you don't know what to take action on and not take action on anymore. And you typically, as you move to that far left side, lose your communication filter.
Alexis here. I'm just popping in to ask you, have you been through something painful and felt like your story could help someone else, but you're not quite sure where to start? I want to help you unpack your journey, find your voice, and turn your story into purpose that heals you and empowers others. Click the link in the show notes below to learn how to start sharing your story with boldness and clarity. And now back to another impactful story. Wow, that is so enlightening. And I feel like when you were talking about the far, not the far right, but the far right, that I was like remembering relationships even like that. I was like, okay, that makes more sense now if I put it into these terms. There was something that you were on your Instagram that I read about, like, how do you decide if a relationship is toxic or if you are like projecting your own trauma or past onto that relationship? How would you define that? What are the different factors? Because we are quick to use the word toxic sometimes, but I don't know how, I wouldn't know how to best define or like divide those two, what would you say?
I have a very different opinion than most people out on social media because since the Me Too movement, I think the language around toxic relationship has also become just a lot more widely used.
Yeah.
And then I think people generalize and try to throw that label onto tons of relationships that probably shouldn't have that label. My opinion is that most, and I'll give it a metric, I think 98% of toxic relationships can actually come back into balance if they have the right tools and they understand what motivates the other person and how to adapt both their communication style, but also meet the other person's underlying needs that they're not voicing. Once you have essentially brain pattern types understood of both parties, the rest becomes actually pretty easy. And I've seen very unstable, extremely toxic relationships that are bordering on the edge of physical abuse, maybe even glazing that line every once in a while. I've seen those come back to an incredibly stable, loving marriage where at the end they're like, I can't even believe we used to do that, because they're not, you can get into a cycle little by little, right? Everything happens incrementally. You go from like the honeymoon phase, which some people, we call it a switch pattern in my work. Some people present one way when security is not anchored. And then as soon as security gets anchored in a relationship, it's like then their true self creeps out.
Yes.
And typically it goes in the direction of somebody can be more covertly controlling and manipulative in the beginning, a little bit more pulled back, a little bit more agreeable, putting on their best self. And then as soon as the commitment is really there, they tend to become more overtly controlling, micromanaging. Suddenly the anxious attachment comes out. This is the most likely cause of toxicity because one person feels blindsided or bait and switched. And then they're constantly scurrying because now they're in the relationship. They've already made the commitment. And sometimes this comes out in 3 months. Sometimes this comes out in 2 years. Sometimes this comes out when you get married.
Or in dating, I'm always like, you gotta wait for the 3 months to really see how they are.
Yes, because this does happen. So perfect example, the guy that's going to be attracted to you, he wants to chase you because you're not clingy. Which is why as soon as real commitment is on the table, it's likely to bring out a side of him that didn't show up in early stages because that would have turned you off. But now that he's got you, little by little, he's just testing the waters. But your style also is to probably let things go for way too long. Like to stay in a relationship that's completely expired for so long, making excuses for them. We'll figure it out. It's like always look on the bright side.
No, I think you hit it on the head before when you were talking about empathy. You know, like leading with empathy and being overly empathetic and giving grace and then being like, well, I don't want to quit on this. And, you know, and all the other reasons that we find to stay in a relationship that might not be the best for us. But I think what is hard is hearing the 98% of, you know, quote unquote toxic relationships now can be healthy. I think that's hard when you have been in a relationship that's been unhealthy and then be like, okay, well, so I should just continue to work on this. But I think I always say this, and I don't know. I mean, I think you would agree is that if two people are both committed to making that change, they're both at the same time willing to implement change. I believe that the relationship would be healthy or like thrive. But I don't think that if it's only one person that's trying to do the change and the other person's not, it's never, I don't know if the pattern will break.
So the interesting thing in my work is that it typically goes that way.
The only one person. Okay.
So what tends to happen is that I'll have one side of the couple.
Okay.
There's a very specific moment in the program. I call it the I'm the asshole moment that eventually everyone gets to where they're like, oh my God. It's like they've pulled back enough of the layers to face themselves in the mirror and realize, oh my God, I totally see what I'm contributing to this. So even if their behavior in a silo is terrible, they're rude, they're lacking empathy, they're selfish, etc., right? Those things can all exist in a silo. There's still a way that I, whoever I am engaging with that in a way that either makes it worse or triggers the cycle, where I likely could disrupt the whole cycle itself and get this person but to potentially step more toward the middle rather than to lean into the worst of their behaviors. So what tends to happen is I start with one because the other one's like, you're a nightmare. I don't, this is a you problem. They do the work. And when they're in break method, their behavior changes so much that typically by the end, whoever the other partner is, they're like, okay, if you made that happen, then you're a magician. You can do anything. You've got me. Because relationship interaction works like ping pong, right? You're volleying back and forth. That's not just one person hitting the ball. There's something happening. And obviously, even if somebody's stonewalling and being quiet, they're still giving something back, even if it's not verbal, right? There's still going to be a toxic back and forth, and oftentimes it's not verbal. So when you look at it like this ping pong match, if I teach somebody how to stop just hitting in the same part of the table every single time, because that's what we do. We get stuck in these cycles where I just subconsciously keep trying to ace you every time. There's now 99% of the table that I could have been hitting that I'm not, because my brain's hiding those choices from me. So when I get somebody to hit to a different place, what happens to the other person? They're literally forced to respond to something that they have never been given before. When you do this, it does walk the other person out of their pattern, and three things will happen. Sometimes they really don't like it, and they'll actually escalate to try to get you to go back to the old way because their brain's addicted to it, even if it's toxic. So that's option number one. Option number two is sometimes it disrupts so much that they'll actually just stand there and stare at you, and they won't even know how to respond because it was enough of a pattern interrupt that it just stopped their cycle in its tracks. And then option number three is they respond in a way that they've never responded before. And a week later, they're like, why are we getting along? What are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm doing break method. Like, oh, I'll talk to Bizzie. And that's what typically happens. We typically see whoever the partner is within a few weeks after graduation. And for what it's worth, I know that hearing that, I think for some people, it makes you kind of go back, like slightly remorse, regret, like, could I have saved certain things? And one of the things that I try to focus on with break method is doing everything we can to focus on radical personal responsibility and not letting shame or regret come into the picture, because ultimately you're where you are now. Like God wanted you here. There, you have a destiny. You haven't missed your destiny. You haven't made a mistake. So I think big picture, it's more for people who are in a relationship right now where they're committed or they've got kids, right? When you have chips on the table, to make it a poker analogy, I think it behooves you to dig into work like this, because if you are all in, it's better to figure out if something like this can actually bring your relationship back into a place that's stable. Because what do you have to lose? Like, you're going to get divorced anyways. And I think often when people do get to this point where they're kind of throwing their hands up, like, I've got nothing to lose, that's typically when things radically turn around. So I don't share this to make people go back and live in the what if land, because I do believe that we all have a very specific destiny and purpose. And ultimately, I think being in momentum is the most important part. And looking back and letting yourself go down some sort of regret or shame spiral is not productive to your healing.
No, for sure. So what would you say to people? Because I've heard it in my own relationships, or just people will say, well, this is just how I am. This is just how I am. This is just my personality. What would you say to someone that says that?
Personality is a byproduct of brain pattern type. So what happens during your early childhood years creates this distortion in your perception of reality. With it, that includes very patterned ways that you snapshot assume about things, how you conclude. And as soon as you have made an assumption, your brain then tries to turn it into a conclusive statement. And at that point, all of your behavior possibilities are restricted, and you can't see what was restricted. This is part of how our behavior is generated from a level that's not conscious. And if anyone listening or watching has ever read something in a book and like, okay, I need to remember to do this next time if I'm on a date. Is that going to be top of mind when you're on the date? No, because we're not consciously moving through encounters with intimate partners. Everything is very much subconscious, and it's very much driven by emotion, and emotion is not able to readily be logically overridden, which is what we would need to do if we were trying to lean on a book that we read. So when we're talking about these sort of emotional responses, what happens is that, right, our brain kind of constrains our beliefs that our behaviors that we have available to us. And I like to use this example because it makes sense to somebody. So you've got a bottle of water right here. Technically, you could grab the bottle of water and throw it to me. That is technically a choice that you have available to you. But you know not to do that because it's not socially acceptable. I haven't pissed you off yet, right? But I wouldn't test you. I'm sure you would. Technically, somebody else might be pissed off enough at what I'm saying.
That's true.
Right? They're like, you don't know what kind of toxic relationship I was in. This girl is a complete fraud. Do you think they would actually think twice about maybe grabbing that bottle and throwing it in my face?
Nope.
There's for sure a person out there. Many people out there.
For sure.
Upon hearing that you can fix toxic relationships, would want to hit me with that bottle. What makes the difference? What makes the difference is how I'm perceiving reality and how my brain is then constraining my possible choices. But that's not something that is happening consciously. It's all happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So when you understand someone's brain pattern type, you understand how their brain is actually skewing or distorting reality, and then in turn skewing behavior choices. Because what ultimately decides what behaviors we choose, it all is our perception of reality.
100%.
100. So that is really what changes between the left and right side, is that really on the left-hand side, especially in the middle of the left, we tend to be probably overly so optimistic to a point where people are like, are you sure it's gonna work out? Meanwhile, people on our equal opposite side on the right skew much more negative. So those types of things are going to have a major outcome in your day-to-day life, because you can't change that until you actually confront it. And I think ultimately a lot of mental health work, a lot of personal development work, you're focused on the behavior. Change the behavior. Change the behavior. You can't just be like, don't do that instead. That's not how behavior works.
Yeah.
You have to actually confront the perception of reality. And there's so many practices and methods that don't do that. It's the perception is everything.
Wow. So even if you are 65 years old and you want to break, unhealthy habits or patterns rather that you have been making for all those years, you would say, yes, you have the ability to change.
Absolutely. Anybody can change. Every year that your brain pattern is running the show, it's like having a deeper and deeper rut. So it is harder to get out of something that you've been doing for 60, 70 years. But I have clients in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s all the time. I would say to a person that might be listening to this that is in those older years, why not live 10 years with mental freedom? Why not live 3 years with mental freedom? I think it would be better to live one day with complete emotional freedom and true sovereignty than to just give up. And one of your questions that I don't think I ever really fully answered was about authentic personality. Like, I'm just like this.
Yes.
The personality is going to be how your behaviors unfold over time and how you're perceiving in a situation. Those are really what make up your personality. I have found with Break Method, when somebody rewires, they find that their personality is actually far more dynamic than they've been socially programmed to believe that it is. And we should all have that ability. When we learn how to oppose our patterns, we do end up being able to change. I know that I can speak to you like this, but a different group, they might need to speak differently.
For sure.
But a lot of people don't have that ability. I know when I can toggle my natural sense of humor on and when I can turn it off. But most people, especially nowadays, everything, it's just who I am, right? Like, it's just my authentic personality.
Yeah.
It's not, though. It's actually one of the ways that you set traps for yourself and play out your cycle over and over again.
That is so interesting. So and we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, if you are doing the brain mapping, right? And let's just say for me, I'm the left middle, right? Then would you then take this test, or would you then give this test to like a potential partner? I don't know how it works.
Yes, people do that all the time.
Okay. And then they say like, oh, you're like, what, like, is there like best matches? Or like, do you get what I'm saying in the way of compatibility?
I totally understand what you're saying.
Like, is it like,
you wouldn't typically want to date somebody that is too close to you. And
Which is interesting
naturally,
because I would be like, in my mind, if you were like, what kind of man do you want? I'd be like, he's stable. That'd be my first thing, probably. He's safe. There's security there, but he's ambitious. And then there's like things like about me. I'm basically saying me. Like that, like.
But do you actually go for safe and stable?
No, but I'm saying I want it.
I know. I get it. I do. I really do.
I'm saying, okay.
I believe you.
She's winking at me. Listen, no, I'm saying I'm drained.
I know that it would be ideal. And here's what I will say.
But does it not work? I'm just wondering.
It can work. In general, people that have the same or very similar brain pattern types friend zone each other. I don't remember what the term is. I feel like it was called like a velvet marriage or something like this. I keep seeing it online where it's basically like a gay guy and a straight girl that decide to be married because they actually like, we like everything
like, well, we really
the
like
same.
each other, but like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
So big picture, if two people had the same pattern and they both took break method, could it work? 100%. I truly believe that if two people do break method, anything could be compatible. Hypothetically, you're going to have the most natural polarity with somebody who's relatively your equal opposite on the brain pattern spectrum. But if the other person isn't actually doing work like break method, that will kick up the same toxicity that it always does. And there's really no way around that. So until a person actually learns how to rewire, where they're aware of what behaviors they have to intentionally curate in their lives to rewire and come back toward the center, they're not going to be the stable person that you're looking for. So you could have very successful. Yeah. But you can pick and choose. Girl, you can have success, you can have looks, but you can't. I'm sorry. You cannot have stability. At least not with mood. Mood and stability is basically what you're signing up for here.
True. Okay. So, okay.
But it keeps you on your toes, though. I'm just
kidding. Does it? It gives me anxiety.
I know, / being on your toes.
But okay, when we're talking about, a woman who is empathetic or is in her masculine and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to, it's the fixers we hear, right?
Yeah.
But wouldn't you say that that's not healthy to be a like, is that always going to be that dynamic? Or are you saying in the break method?
I'm saying if they both do it, then you won't have to do that because they will actually,
because they're looking, they're self-aware now.
Yes. Their self-awareness will actually help them oppose their pattern. So you're naturally good at self-regulation.
I am.
The people on the right need to co-regulate.
Yes.
So at a certain point, they're going to try to use you to regulate. Whether it's through sex, whether it's through communication, whether it's through some sort of push-pull dynamic where now you're starting to chase, like they had to do enough for you to kind of chase them. That's all co-regulation. They would learn how to be more of what you're looking for, which is strong, secure, stable, more independent, rather than just immediately lean on you for all of those things. So they're going to have to oppose their patterns. But then when you're opposing your patterns, you're going to have to learn to be a little bit more needy. You're going to have to learn to go to them with problems. I literally have to remind myself sometimes, like something will come up and I'll be like, this is a good thing for me to bring to my husband. Because mentally, like, I don't need that. My brain knows how to solve the problem. But I like now when I find problems that I can go take to my husband and be like, honey, will you please help me with this?
Because you also know that he needs that from you.
He needs that from me, right? So it's about knowing like how the other person, needs to be needed. Yeah. And then also to learn how to overcome all of our deeply ingrained patterns that are keeping us stuck. So ultimately, the name of the game with brain pattern mapping is to know exactly what your 9 markers are so that you know how to intentionally oppose all of those patterns so that you can rewire.
And now, when you go through this, is there so you take the
it's online. It takes about 20 minutes.
So you take that, you get your results back. Then what happens?
Then you start a roughly 16 to 20 week process of break method that's broken into 4 different phases. There's 6 one-on-one appointments, and you're moving through the arc. The first part of the arc, you're actually mapping different data points from childhood and trying to understand how they all map to each other.
Wow.
We have a really unique way of doing it, though, because the brain pattern doesn't want to be found out. And because those self-deceptive
That is
tendencies
so crazy to
can
me.
be so profound that even the person, it's hidden from them. In
Yeah.
particular, an example of this would be borderline personality disorder. One of the markers of borderline is that they can't take ownership of the things that you're telling them they did because they split and they're like, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. So what we do in Break Method is anticipate when we get close to the target zone, this person's brain is going to try to derail their process. And people naturally are trying to figure out what the process is so they can manipulate and twist it. We've broken everything apart in silos, and often you have no idea what we're doing and why and how it's going to be brought together to prevent you from both lying to the person helping you and from lying to yourself. So once we're bringing out all these pieces, so really the first part is kind of separating out these jigsaw puzzle pieces, but you don't really know what the puzzle looks like yet. Because if you knew what the puzzle was going to look like, you can be like, oh, I'm going to bring these ones over here. These make me feel good. But if you don't really know what you're building, you can't lie to yourself. So now you've got all these kind of different silos of pieces. Then you're learning how these pieces all fit together. And then at the end, that's where you have your, oh my God, I'm the asshole moment, where you look at it and all of a sudden you can't hide from it. The self-deception is gone. The paradigm has broken. I call this moment reality vertigo, where once you see it and accept the truth, it makes you retroactively have to reflect very differently on some of the decisions that you've made. And that moment, of course, can be challenging to overcome without going into regret or remorse. But it's a process that has to be gone through in healing to get to the other side, because we have to be able to take responsibility. We have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and be like, I did that. These things happened to me, but also I did that.
100%.
And I've continued to do this, and I'm done doing it.
Would you say that the right side tends to fall into like a victim mentality more than the left side?
Yes. Because inherently, if you're trying to co-regulate, it's very likely that you're going to feel like the other person's failing you because they're not necessarily explicitly saying, I need you to do this for me. It's all very under the radar, implicit neediness. And they're likely picking somebody who doesn't want to be needed in that way. So it's a setup to fail so that they can be a victim. Another way that people on the right could, of course, feel victimized is if their parents bred mediocrity with that everyone's a winner sort of mentality. I had the exact opposite, where I'd go to my dad thinking that I had this A paper and hand it to him, and he'd call me a simpleton, tell me to go get a thesaurus. I'm like, what? It's so good. Eventually, I was just like, my dad's too hard. I'm going to turn this in anyways. I don't even care. Roll the dice. One time I actually brought it back. I'm like, this was an A+, you MF. What were you trying to do to me? But that's, for example, on the left-hand side is like, I didn't inherently trust his authority. So even when he was trying to make me convinced that my paper wasn't good enough, at a certain point, I'm like, sounds like a you problem. I'm going to turn it in nonetheless. Thanks for playing.
Thanks for playing.
But on this right-hand side, when your parents, unfortunately, make you believe that you're better at things than you are, it sets you up for failure when you're an adult. And then it's very easy to feel victimized by everyone around you because you didn't necessarily learn a good work ethic. You're not good at accurately self-reflecting. Which on the right-hand side is typically the case, where you have either one or two very doting, loving parents that skew that child's perception of self.
That
has very serious real-life consequences as an adult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can see that, especially in this generation. You recently wrote and published a book called Your Brain is a Filthy Liar. What chapter, obviously you want us to read the whole book, but what chapter, if you had to really choose, would you want us to read?
Oh, that's such a tricky one. Well, if I could only do one, I would have you pick the rebellion zone chapter that matches your brain pattern type. So there is a page in the book where you can actually scan it to do your brain pattern mapping. Once you have your brain pattern type, then the rest of the book becomes very customized. So if I only get one, I want you to read the rebellion zone for your specific brain pattern type because it tells you exactly how to undo the damage that's been done. And it gives you extremely actionable steps, how to meet all the patterns of self-deception. And it teaches you a tool called Eli, which allows you to actually rewire the language that your brain is generating from that distorted perception of reality.
Wow. That is, I cannot wait to purchase it. Where is it available?
It's going to be available at all major retailers on June 3rd.
June 3rd.
June 3rd is the day, and I will get you an advanced copy.
Wow. I'm really looking forward to it. What do you think, as we wrap up, when the premise of the podcast is turning pain into purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what, like, if there's certain patterns of people or like certain types of people that might be more prone to doing this or not. But what would you say to someone who is trying to turn their pain into purpose and maybe they're coming up against some blocks, or maybe their brain is telling them like, no one really cares about your story, or like there's maybe lies that are being told to themselves and that they are feeling discouraged in sharing. What would you say?
I think this work is for absolutely everybody, including people whose lives are great, because no matter what, there's still other levels that you can get to, even if that other level is being an even better communicator, being even more successful or productive at your job. So the work that I do ranges from severe mental illness and incarceration, for example, all the way to some of the top CEOs in the world. So everyone has something to gain from this. In general, with Break Method, we work a lot with people who are in dire straits. They don't feel like they can go on anymore. Most commonly people that are struggling with intrusive thoughts, anxiety, OCD. Getting stuck in your head is a tricky one because you can't ever escape it. You bring your problems with you. And one of the 9 markers that you or I would have actually is that historical of our pattern is that we only go into our head at the end to review, and we're not even there necessarily for that long. So it can make other people feel like you get over things really quickly. I don't know if this would resonate with you, but I know for me, if I'm in a fight with my husband, as soon as the fight's done, I'm going to go to bed. And I've literally been woken up by my husband that's like, you really can just go to bed like that? And I'm like, what? Yeah, we're done, right? We finished.
If it's if it's resolved, then it's resolved.
So if I feel like it gets to a point of finality, then I'm going to be like, okay, we good? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to ruminate on it. I'm going to just reset and move forward because that's my trauma-based coping mechanism. It's like, okay, we're good. I'm reset. The people that cannot reset, that ruminate, that dwell, they struggle with intrusive thoughts, negative self-talk. It just never shuts down. That is the person that most commonly comes to my work because they're exhausted. Nothing they've tried has worked. Medication hasn't worked. Nothing stops the thoughts. Yeah. Break Method stops the thoughts. It's supposed to be quiet up there. If I'm not actively trying to think of something, it's quiet.
Wow. Well, I cannot wait to take the test. I cannot wait to read your book. And I know that all of my listeners are going to be so excited to learn more about this because I feel like I always kind of say words like rewire, but I didn't know enough about this until now. And so I feel like it's so powerful, so useful, and it helps people not feel trapped and stuck in their behavior because a lot of times we just think, man, I can't get out of this pattern. I can't break free. And so I'm really thankful and grateful that you came today and shared, and we will definitely put your link in the show notes as well, and so everyone can purchase as well as where they can find you on social media.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Yay. Thank you for listening to Shift Happens. You are the reason I started this podcast. I hope it finds the ears and hearts of those who need it so that you know your voice matters and you are reminded that someone needs to hear your story. As always, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Shift Happens. You are the reason I started this podcast. I hope it finds the ears and hearts of those who need it so that you know your voice matters and you are reminded that someone needs to hear your story. As always, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And I'll see you next week.